It started as a regular Tuesday morning. I was sipping on a lukewarm cup of coffee, standing on my back porch, staring out at the shed I had built with my own two hands. That shed wasn't just some prefab piece of junk. I had designed it, planned it, spent weeks working on it during weekends and late evenings after work. It was my retreat, my workspace, my pride. Cedar walls, dark green trim, reinforced flooring, even installed solar-powered lights, and a compact ventilation system. It wasn't an eyesore. In fact, several neighbors had complimented it. Some even asked for advice because they were thinking of building something similar. But that morning, everything changed. As I looked out, I saw it was gone. Just gone. At first, I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Was I looking in the wrong spot? Did something happen last night? I stepped off the porch, heart racing, walking quickly across the lawn to where the shed used to stand. All that remained were scattered boards, broken beams, and tire tracks in the dirt. It looked like someone had come in, ripped it apart, and taken it away like trash. I was stunned. My mind couldn't process it. Who would do this, and why? That's when I noticed a yellow notice pinned to a piece of wood. It was soggy from dew, but still readable. My eyes narrowed. It was a demolition notice from the HOA. It said the structure was not in compliance with architectural standards and had been removed at the homeowner's expense. They had the audacity to add a line at the bottom: "Your property will be billed for the removal." No warning, no hearing, no citation, no phone call. I stormed inside and called the HOA office immediately. A robotic voice answered, directing me to press buttons and leave voicemails. I pressed 0 until it transferred me to the manager, a man named Gerald Whitmore. He answered casually, as if nothing had happened. "Yes, Mr. Harlan, we took down the shed this morning." He said it like he was discussing the weather. I demanded to know why they did it without notifying me, why they didn't send a letter, give me a citation, or at least a chance to respond. He replied calmly, smug even, according to Section 7 of the HOA guidelines, all freestanding structures must be pre-approved by the board. Yours was not approved. Therefore, it was in violation. I told him I submitted my design 2 months ago. I had the email. I had printed the forms and even followed up twice. He paused, then said, "Well, our records don't show that. And since we didn't approve it, it had to be removed." I was speechless. My emails were ignored, and now they acted like they never existed. They not only tore down my shed, they erased the paper trail. I told him I was going to contest this, take legal action if I had to. He sighed and said, "You're welcome to go through the proper channels, but I'd suggest reviewing your agreement first. It's airtight." Then he hung up. That was the moment the rage set in. Not just anger rage. This wasn't just about a shed. It was about power, abuse, arrogance. The HOA had long been a thorn in the side of many homeowners in our community, and Gerald was the source of most of it. Excessive fines for grass being too long, threats for the wrong paint color on shutters, petty violations used as weapons against anyone who questioned them, and now they had gone too far. They thought I would roll over, pay the fine, rebuild, or shut up, but they were wrong. I started gathering evidence. First, I found the emails I'd sent dated, time-stamped, with the attached shed designs. I had digital proof. Then I went through my security camera footage. Lucky for me, the camera on my garage faced just enough of the backyard to catch the truck pulling in at 6:12 a.m. A crew in unmarked overalls, no visible company name. They started smashing the shed before the sun had even fully risen. I shared the video on a local Facebook group for the neighborhood. The reaction was instant. People were outraged. Some commented that the HOA had done similar things to them, removing decorations, fining for invisible weeds, even threatening foreclosures over unpaid late fees. My story lit a fire. Then I started getting messages. A woman named Denise told me her garden gazebo was removed last year without warning. A man named Carl said the HOA fined him $500 because his mailbox was the wrong shape. Another neighbor, Tammy, said she tried to run for the board, but was disqualified on a technicality because she had unpaid fines, which were later revealed to be bogus. It was a pattern. Abuse, control, intimidation. That's when I knew I couldn't just fight them over my shed. I had to do something bigger. Again, attending HOA meetings. At first, they were tense. Gerald and the rest of the board eyed me with caution. I asked questions. I requested records. I cited bylaws. I brought copies of emails and photos and footage. They tried to shut me down, claiming certain topics were not open for discussion, but I kept coming. I learned that the HOA board was made up of 5 people, all elected, but hardly anyone ever voted. Meetings were sparsely attended. Most homeowners didn't know they could run or how to challenge decisions. The board had been self-sustaining for years, re-electing themselves with no oversight. I decided to run for a seat. Gerald laughed when I filed the paperwork. "You think one seat's going to change anything?" he said. I smiled back. "Let's find out." In the weeks that followed, I launched a campaign not just for me, but for change. Flyers, door-to-door conversations, social media posts. I told people what had happened to me, and I asked what had happened to them. The stories poured in. So many had been bullied, threatened, or ignored. I gave them a voice. Then something unexpected happened. Denise filed to run, then Carl, then Tammy, 4 of us. Enough to challenge the majority. Election day arrived. For the first time in years, turnout was massive. People showed up in record numbers. Neighbors who hadn't attended a single meeting in 5 years came out just to vote. When the results were counted, it was clear. We won. 4 out of 5 seats flipped. The room went silent. Gerald looked pale. For the first time, he wasn't in control. I became vice president. Denise was elected president. Carl took over as treasurer. Tammy became the compliance officer. Our first order of business? Transparency. We opened all records to the homeowners. We launched an audit. We reviewed every complaint, every violation, every fine issued in the last 5 years. What we found was shocking. Thousands of dollars in fees with no receipts. Biased enforcement. Conflicts of interest. And buried deep in the financials, large payments to a maintenance company owned by Gerald's cousin. We brought it all to light. Homeowners were refunded. Policies were rewritten. Accountability was restored. And my shed? I rebuilt it. This time with full board approval, unanimous. Of course. As I stood outside my new shed, tools in hand, neighbors walking by would stop, smile, and say, "Looks great." But what felt even better was knowing that no one else would have to go through what I did. We had taken back our neighborhood, not through revenge, through action, through unity. They demolished my shed without asking. So I demolished the HOA board with truth. And this was just the beginning. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The image of that empty space where my shed once stood kept flashing in my mind like a nightmare on repeat. Every time I looked out the window, that blank spot in my yard burned into my memory. The worst part wasn't just the destruction, it was the silence. No notice, no knock, no permission asked. Just a clean sweep by the HOA like my property meant nothing. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the now useless padlock I used for the shed. My hands trembled with frustration. That shed wasn't just wood and nails to me, it was years of collected tools, memories from my father's old toolbox, and my weekend refuge. Now gone, with no warning, no apology, and absolutely no right. So did what anyone with a sense of justice would do. I started digging. At first, I just wanted answers. Who authorized the demolition? Why wasn't I informed? I started by calling the HOA office directly. I expected a professional response, maybe even an apology. But what I got was indifference. The lady who answered sounded like she had a script in front of her. "We enforce community standards and reserve the right to remove non-compliant structures," she said flatly. "Non-compliant? Since when was my shed a problem? It's been there for years." I snapped. She calmly repeated, "A notice was issued regarding property appearance violations. If you have concerns, you may attend the next HOA meeting." That was it. No sympathy, no explanation of what rule I supposedly broke. Just a cold shoulder and a meeting invite. And that's when I decided I wasn't just going to ask questions. I was going to expose them. I pulled out the binder where I kept every letter and notice from the HOA since I bought the house. I flipped through every document, looking for anything that said my shed was a violation. Nothing. No warnings. No letters. No complaints. Then I remembered something important. My neighbor Mike once told me his deck was almost removed because the HOA claimed he never got it approved, even though he had a signed permit. He fought back and won, but only after threatening legal action. That was when it clicked. This HOA wasn't just about rules. It was about control. So I called Mike. Hey man, I started. Did you ever deal with the board trying to push you around with your deck? Mike laughed bitterly. Don't get me started. They tried to say, built without approval even after I showed them the stamped permit. I had to call a lawyer before they backed off. I told him about the shed. He was quiet for a second, then said, man, that's not legal. They can't demolish personal property without notice. You could sue. I wasn't ready to go to court just yet, but I was ready for that meeting. The next HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and when I walked in, I noticed how cozy everything felt. Plush chairs, bottled water, snacks, all paid for by homeowner dues. Hours. I recognized a few of the board members by face, retired folks with stern expressions, always quick to point out if your grass was a little too long or your garbage cans were still outside past noon. When my turn came to speak, I stood up and calmly explained the situation. My shed was removed without any notice. I was not given a warning, no written violation, nothing. This is unacceptable and likely illegal. The board president, a man named Carl with a permanent frown, leaned into his mic. We acted in accordance with HOA guidelines. Unauthorized structures are subject to removal. It's your responsibility to stay in compliance. I replied firmly. Show me the notice. Show me the complaint. Show me where in your records I was ever told about a violation. Carl hesitated. Then he looked at the secretary, who shuffled through some papers, clearly flustered. There was silence. Then Carl said, we'll have to review the documents and follow up. That was their way of dodging it. I knew I was being brushed aside again, but this time wasn't going to leave it there. I went home and started gathering allies. Over the next 2 weeks, I went door to door. I spoke to my neighbors. I shared my story, and I started hearing more like it: fines for garden beds, threats for mailbox designs, notices about minor things like wind chimes being too loud. The more people I talked to, the more I realized this HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood. It was punishing it. So I started a petition. I created a flyer with my story, highlighting the unlawful shed demolition, and included space for signatures. I called it, Take Back Our Neighborhood. I didn't ask people to blindly support me. I asked them to stand up for fairness, for transparency, for respect. I got 47 signatures in the first week. Then I dug deeper. I filed a public records request for the HOA financials. They legally had to show how they were spending our dues. What I found made my jaw drop. Tens of thousands of dollars spent on landscaping consultants, unexplained event costs, a $2,000 Christmas party for board members and their families, and not a single dollar spent on homeowner repairs or community improvements. I printed everything. I made a binder of documents. I started recording my conversations legally, of course, and building a case not just against the shed demolition, but against the whole system. Then I set my sights on the upcoming board election. I learned the rules. Any homeowner in good standing could run for the board. So I announced my candidacy. At first, Carl and the others laughed. They rolled their eyes during the next meeting. But when I brought 87 signatures on my nomination form and passed out copies of the financial documents during the open forum, no one was laughing. My campaign wasn't fancy, just facts, truth, and a promise to return power to the residents. I called for open votes, clear communication, and full transparency. I promised to create a real appeals process. And above all, I vowed no homeowner would ever be blindsided like I was. Neighbors started showing up at meetings. They started speaking out, asking questions, demanding answers. The board grew uncomfortable. Election night came. Ballots were counted publicly. When they announced I had won a seat and Carl had lost his, I felt a rush of satisfaction. Not from revenge, but from justice. I took my seat at the next meeting as the newest board member. And one of my first motions? A full review of property enforcement actions over the last 2 years. And a policy that no structure could be removed without verified notice, documentation, and an appeal process. As the motion passed, I looked around the room. I had come full circle, from victim to reformer, from frustration to leadership. They demolished my shed without asking, but I demolished their arrogance, one truth at a time. After the second meeting, I noticed a shift in the air. Neighbors who had previously waved at me now avoided eye contact. A few whispered behind my back. Some offered quiet support, but most were afraid to speak publicly. The HOA had created a culture of fear, and people just wanted to avoid being next in line for their wrath. But I wasn't going to let it die down. I filed a formal complaint with the city. I gathered everything: emails, photos, the surveillance footage of the HOA contractor on my property, the before and after images of my shed. I contacted the zoning office, shared that I had permits for the shed and that it complied with all local building codes. When they heard that the HOA had taken it down without a court order or legal process, they were alarmed. It triggered a formal investigation. Now had the city watching, but I needed more. I started a neighborhood petition. Quietly, respectfully, I knocked on doors. I explained what happened, not just my story, but others I had heard. About fines for flowers that weren't regulation color. About elderly neighbors who got letters threatening liens over garden gnomes. About people too scared to fight back. Some residents were hesitant to sign, but many did. I wasn't forcing anyone. I was just sharing the truth, and it spread faster than I expected. Then came the turning point. I received a letter from the HOA board threatening legal action against me for defamation, they claimed. They wanted me to stop spreading misinformation and inciting unrest. But I had receipts. I had emails. I had surveillance footage. I had official documents from the city saying my shed was legal. I wasn't lying, and they knew it. So I didn't back down. Instead, I went to the local news. I wasn't expecting much, just a short piece in the community section. But the story hit a nerve. A homeowner's shed, torn down without permission. A rogue HOA. A quiet man standing up against unchecked power. It spread. The local paper picked it up, then a regional TV station, then online blogs and forums dedicated to HOA. Horror stories caught on. I became something of a local symbol, reluctantly, but powerfully. With all this attention, I pushed for a special HOA election. Our bylaws allowed for one if enough homeowners signed a petition, and we had the numbers now. Barely, but enough. The board tried to block it. They claimed we hadn't followed the right format, the right margins on the printed petition. But the city and a lawyer at hired pro bono said otherwise. The election would happen, and when it did, it was a landslide. People were fed up, not just because of what happened to me, but because they were tired of living in fear in their own homes. The board that had ruled for years was gone, replaced by people who actually lived in the community, people who cared, people who listened. I didn't run for the board. I didn't want power. I just wanted my shed back. But the new board did something better. They apologized publicly. They compensated me for the shed and all the stress they caused. They rewrote the rules to ensure no such thing could ever happen again. They removed the contractor from the HOA's list of approved service providers. And slowly, the neighborhood healed. I rebuilt my shed. Better this time. Stronger. A symbol of standing your ground when you know you're right. A neighbor helped me paint it. Another brought lemonade. We laughed. We shared stories. It finally felt like a community again. The shed stood tall once again, but this time it was more than just a structure. It was a message, quiet but firm, that no one, no board, no rule, no position of authority could override common decency and respect. My neighbors started opening up. People who had once stayed silent during HOA meetings began speaking freely. You could feel the difference. People smiled more, waved more. The fear was gone. The new board was different from the beginning. They introduced community forums instead of closed-door meetings. Homeowners could actually speak, ask questions, and make suggestions. The ridiculous fines stopped. Instead of punishing, they asked, helped, supported. They organized clean-up, drives, family events, and even a monthly coffee morning in the park. The whole energy shifted. One afternoon, as I was working in my backyard, hammering the last hook for a hanging planter, a woman approached me. I'd seen her before, but never spoken with her. She smiled and handed me a small card. She said, "Thank you. What you stood up for it gave all of us courage." I nodded, a little overwhelmed, and told her I didn't expect any of this, that I just wanted to protect my space, my rights. She replied, "That's what makes it even more powerful. You didn't do it for attention. You did it because it was right." It stayed with me. Because she was right, I never intended to become some kind of voice or symbol. I just wanted to keep what I had built. But that one injustice had exposed something deeper, that when systems go unchecked, they grow arrogant, and that ordinary people, when pushed, can fight back and win. I was later invited to speak at a community legal workshop organized by a local housing rights group. They wanted me to share my experience, not just the legal side of it, but the emotional part, the fear, the anger, the frustration, and how to channel it into action. I told the group everything, the emails, the meetings, the threats, but I also told them about the neighbors who stood with me, the reporter who listened, and the new beginning we all built together. One of the attendees, an older gentleman who had been battling his own HOA over access ramps for his disabled wife, came up afterward with tears in his eyes. He said, "I thought I was the only one. You've given me hope." And that's when I realized something even more powerful than the shed, or the vote, or the apology. We are never really alone in these struggles. We just need someone to speak first. Months passed. The seasons changed. The shed now had lights, little wind chimes, and a small vegetable patch beside it. It was part storage, part retreat. My wife often joked that I'd turned it into my second home. Maybe I had, because it wasn't just a shed anymore. It was a reminder. Sometimes we're told to sit down, to let it go, to not stir the waters. But silence isn't always peace. And letting things slide can lead to losing more than we expect. That HOA board had believed they could do whatever they pleased. They had grown too comfortable, too confident, and too used to no one pushing back. But all it took was one person saying, "No, this isn't right." And then everything changed. The legal side didn't end with just the apology. The city issued a formal warning to the previous board members and began auditing other HOAs for similar abuses. The contractors involved faced disciplinary action, and new guidelines were introduced citywide on how HOAs could interact with private property. It was like my little story had unlocked something bigger, a reminder that the rules exist for all of us, not just those in charge. Now, on warm evenings, I sit by the shed with a cup of coffee, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors. We talk about our gardens, our kids, our weekend plans. There's laughter now, where before there was tension. And every now and then, someone new moves into the neighborhood. They hear the story eventually. Someone will mention, "That's the guy who took down the HOA board." We laugh. I shrug. But deep down, I know it mattered. It mattered more than I ever expected. Because sometimes standing up isn't about being loud or dramatic. It's about not backing down when something you love is taken from you. It's about knowing your rights. It's about trusting that the truth, when told clearly and persistently, can still move mountains, or at least unseat a stubborn board. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted fairness, and maybe a little peace. And in the end, I got both.